You're listening to the Infinite Banking Mastery Podcast. Did you know that you could build a tax-free pool of wealth that's liquid and accessible all your life while building your retirement nest egg? Gain full control of your financial future and stop relying on the government and banks. The wealthy have already discovered this wealth-building secret. Now it's your turn to get financially secure without following the conventional wisdom that keeps you in debt to banks. Now here's your host, Valerie LaRoque.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Hope that you are enjoying your fall thus far. And for those of you who have been dealing with the hurricane activity, just please know that our hearts and prayers are definitely with you. We just can't believe the devastation that has been caused. It's just crazy. So today I thought we would talk about and branch off of a little bit what we talked about last week's podcast. I said that I might go into that a little bit more, the story of the grocery store and what it means to turn inventory. I thought I would just elaborate a little bit on that this week. There is an excellent slide that Nelson Nash put together and then passed it down to those of his that he trained, those agents that he trained. And so I have a copy of this slide, and I'm going to talk through it because I think he did a really good job of describing his thoughts. And certainly, if you listen through this podcast and then realize at the end, that was a little confusing, or maybe it would be helpful for me to have some visuals, and you'd like to work together, feel free to reach out. Nelson put this slide together to illustrate the difference between compound interest and keeping your money in motion, the velocity of money, keeping it moving. And in the description of what I'm about to share with you, it does make it seem like the compounding interest is not that cool, not that great, not really a big deal, and certainly not what you're seeking to do the most of, that you should be more focused on keeping your money in motion rather than just putting it somewhere and letting it sit. Now, I will say that the whole life policies that we help people with, it is pretty cool, actually, the compounding interest inside, and certainly that you can continue to earn that compound interest uninterrupted while you borrow against your policy and do other things that you need, pay off debts, purchase things that you need, or investing in things that might become cash flowing for you as well, to really build up and grow your assets and your wealth and to have more channels of passive income. Because certainly one of the most powerful things you could do with your banking system is to borrow against it to invest in other cash flowing investments. A lot of people are doing real estate and using these policies to buy rental properties, use the funds as down payments on rental properties, or if the premium's large enough, maybe purchase the house in full. And they're using it in those sorts of ways, and then getting rental income from the people renting their properties. Now they have that income. And also at the same time, their policy has not skipped a beat, and they're still earning on the full value of their account, including the amount that they borrowed against. And so that uninterrupted growth and compounding is just like a giant snowball as it grows. And it is actually amazing and does make the policy pretty great. So that is a factor that is great. But he's trying to say, even with how awesome that is, in comparison to keeping your money moving, it's like nothing. It's not a big deal. It's not where you should have your focus when thinking about and trying to grow your banking system. But instead, you should have your focus on keeping your money in motion, because that is where the true power lies when trying to grow your banking system and trying to become your own banker. It really lies in the power of keeping your money in motion. And that's really exactly what banks are doing. And so we're trying to do what banks are doing. So we want to keep that money in motion. And that's really where all the opportunity comes in to grow your system and to create more cash flow. So the example I'm going to go over again is Nelson's example. And he says, if you were a paint store owner back in 1988, and so you had to purchase paint to stock your shelves, and that paint cost you wholesale, cost you $6 for one can of paint. And then this paint store owner would turn around and sell the paint because that's what they sell. So he had to sell the paint for $8, and he would make a $2 profit from selling that can of paint. And then once he received the $8 from selling the can of paint, he would turn around and go purchase another can of paint for $6 again so that he could stock the shelf and sell it again. So again, we're talking about an example of what it means to turn product. And so that's an example of one turn. Purchase the product wholesale for $6, sell it for $8, you have it a profit of $2, and then you go back out to your wholesale location, buy another gallon of paint for $6 and turn it again. So how many times can you turn it? So he says in his example that he could turn 1 gallon of paint, this paint store owner, 10 times in a year for a profit of $20. But let's just say that this paint store owner wanted to hold on to that paint and see how it would value or how the value would grow if he just held on to it for 11 years. So he stored his paint in the best location, made sure it was airtight, kept it in a cool place where it was dark so the paint would not get ruined so that he could sell it 11 years later. He knew that if he held on to that paint, that he would be able to get more money for it in the future. So 11 years later, he sells the paint and he's able to sell it for $18. That is a $12 profit as opposed to the $2 profit. And so that is an example, the example of holding the $6 can until he could sell it for $18. That is an example of compounding every year at 10%. And so that's what he would have done. That's what he would have received had he held on to that can and see how the value would increase, be like compounding $6 over 11 years at 10% would equal 18. But what did he miss out on, right? So he took that can of paint out of circulation. He's not able to turn that can because he took it out of circulation. He's not using it and then selling it and then using the $6 to buy another can of paint. So he was unable to turn that can of paint 10 times a year because that's how many times he could turn the paint. And each time that he turned it, he had a $2 profit and 10 times he could turn it. So that's $20 a year that he missed out on while he was holding on to it and letting it just grow in value. And so 11 years later, what he missed out on from not turning the paint is $220. So he missed out on $220 to be able to earn the $12. It's a $208 difference. And so Nelson Nash says, this is an example of keeping your money in motion, which is what banks do, versus letting it sit. So banks are telling us, put your money over here, over there, invest it in different things, or leave it in your checking or savings, and let it sit. And they want us to let it sit in our savings accounts because then they can use it. They can wrap it up with interest and they can sell it back to us. But what are they doing with the money? They're not letting it sit, not a chance. They are not housing all this money and just letting it sit there. They are taking that money and as fast as they get it, they're turning it around and selling it to you and me. So they are keeping the money in motion at all times. And that's the difference he's trying to point out. Just that it's so much more powerful to keep your money in motion than just put it somewhere and let it sit for the banks to be able to use and turn instead of you. And then they're keeping your money in motion for you and they're making all the profit. So again, I will say that compound interest within the whole life policy is one of the magical things about it as well, because it's still growing even while you're using it. He's just trying to illustrate how much more power there is if you are keeping it in motion. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard this quote before, that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it, and he who doesn't, pays it. And that's a quote from Albert Einstein. At least there is some controversy about that. So maybe it's not from Albert Einstein, but that's where I feel that it's come from, just from everything I've looked at and read. But yeah, you don't want to be the one paying it, of course. You'd much rather be earning it. So compound interest is great, especially when you're earning that compound interest. Just try to imagine how much more power there is if you are also keeping that money in motion. At the same time, you also have compound interest on your side and building for you. So I hope that example, that illustration helped with the concept of turning inventory, turning the can of peas in Nelson's story. I think it's really helpful and it really does shed some light, I think, on the whole concept. So I hope that that was helpful for you. Next week, I will be getting back to pages from Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. You don't want to miss it. It's full of so much wisdom. You really should grab a copy if you don't have one. Until then, I hope you have another great week. Feel free to reach out if you would like to work together. I'd be happy to meet you and help you. Thanks so much again for tuning in. Take care.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.